Hello and welcome to MalMakes. Today we're going to be painting a scene from the new phenomenon Pokémon Go. This is the full version. If you're interested in the time-lapse, you can click on the card here. Otherwise, let's get started. Those of you that have been watching for a while will realize I have a new easel. I had a metal black one before and it was doing a good job. It's just that some of the techniques I do where I really tap on the canvas, well, it wasn't sturdy enough for that. So I went ahead and bought this one. I got it from Blick Art. It's an H-frame wood and it's the medium duty easel they have. So the other thing you're going to notice is I'm painting for the first time in portrait. Now normally my canvas is turned and I'm painting in landscape, but because you play Pokemon Go with your phone vertical, I thought I should just paint it the same way, just so it gives you that same idea. Now the first thing we're going to do is paint our sky. For my sky, I'm going to be starting with a few different blues. Now I have an ultramarine blue here with a little bit of primary cyan, just to make it a little less dark because ultramarine blue is very, very dark. And I'm going to go ahead and start by brushing this on the very top of my canvas. And then I'm going to work my way upwards and downwards. Now I started a little bit further down because I do have a darker color I'm planning on putting up towards the top. And there's a lot of lighter colors going to come next. Now I'm going to pick up a darker version of this color, and all it is that ultramarine plus cyan, plus a little bit of Paynes gray, which is just basically the same thing with a little bit of carbon black in it. And this is just going to be my super dark color up here. I'm just going to work this down into my regular blue here. Next I'm going to pick up my lighter color, which like I said before is just that ultramarine cyan plus a little bit of white. And I'm going to work that up into this blue. And then I'm also going to work that down right about to where the horizon's going to be, which is just about middle of canvas. The next thing I'm going to do is lighten up the bottom. So I just grabbed a little bit of titanium white and I'm just trying to work it into this light blue down here, just to lighten it up. Now just to even this up, I'm just going to go back through a few of my colors, and I'm just using some of this lighter ultramarine cyan mix, just so it's still wet right here. Then I'm just going to go back into a little bit of my other colors, and just kind of try and mix those up. Now I'm just going to continue working my way up, and take a little bit more of the Paynes gray, and just use that to kind of darken the top here. My sky is dry, it's time to start marking in some clouds. So I'm going to go ahead and mark in where my horizon line is, which is just at about 12 inches. And you can see I've already painted one cloud, I was just trying it out. And then I'm going to go ahead and put my T-square right at 12 inches and draw my horizon line in. That way I can add clouds without worrying if they're below the horizon or not, like I did that one. So I'm adding in these clouds and I'm just using this tiny little brush, and I'm just going to go ahead and try and dot some of them in. And if I find this brush is too big, I can just switch to a smaller one, that's not a problem. And I'm just trying to tap a few of these guys in close to the horizon. So I've mixed up a slightly darker gray. You can see it on my little sample cloud here. I'm going to add kind of a shadow to all of these clouds, but then I'm going to use that color to make a few bigger clouds up here because they're kind of further away, so they have a bigger shadow on them. So I'm just going to go ahead and take this darker gray and start adding on just a little touch of shadow on some of these guys. Now I'm going to do the same thing with an even darker shade. And then I'm also going to use this to shade my darker clouds up here. So I'm just going to add a few of these little shadows in. Now the trick with these clouds is not to think about it too much or you're not going to like them. You kind of have to stand back and look at the whole picture. So now I'm just trying to go back and forth with some of my colors until I sort of get clouds that I'm happy with, because I think some of them are slightly too dark and some of them just need to be kind of evened out between the two. The next thing I want to do is paint in a little crescent moon. So I'm going to go ahead and draw it in chalk first to make sure I like it. For the ocean, I used a little bit of a blue-green color with a little bit of black, and I'm just going to go ahead and lay this down along the horizon that I marked in earlier. Just going to make sure I draw a nice straight line, and then I'm just going to kind of block in this dark blue-gray. It's time to start blocking in some of the waves. So I'm going to take white and sort of lay that at the bottom of where my ocean's going to go. And then I'm just going to work it back in towards that dark blue-green I have. And I'm going to leave it a bit streaky, unlike my sky, because I want it to kind of look like waves as it turns to the different streaks of color. I'm going to go ahead and start to sketch in my wave here. And my paint is still wet, so I can actually kind of just scrape it off with my pencil. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of fill all of this in. Before I start on that wave, I'm going to go ahead and start filling in my sand. And this color is burnt sienna, titanium white, a little bit of violet, and then just a touch of black to make it slightly grayer. So it's kind of this weird mix of all these sorts of things. So I'm going to kind of just take this and fill it in towards the wave, and just finish blocking in the rest of the raw canvas. So now I'm taking my sand color, and I'm just going to go ahead and start to fill this in here. I'm also going to use some white, so I make sure I don't lose this line I've sketched in. Now I'm taking my ocean color with a little bit of gray. I'm just going to go ahead and start to fill in the underside of this wave in with this color. Now I'm bringing a little bit of shadow in underneath, and this is just burnt sienna with a little bit of carbon black and then just whatever blue was left on my brush. Then I'm going to take a clean brush and just kind of try and work these two together a little bit. I'm just taking a little bit more of that lighter color and adding that back into the bottom. Maybe I'll add a little bit of blue in, and this is going to look like a complete mess for a while, so don't let it scare you. Now I'm just going to continue to add a little bit more of my highlights and shadows in here. And I'm making sure I'm curving these as I go. So they're little curves almost. Then I'm going to take kind of a burnt sienna blue-gray and just kind of pull all of this up. Now I'm going to start bringing in some of this foam. So I have kind of my sand color with a little bit of white, and I'm just going to go ahead and kind of tap that in here. So you can see I extended the water just a little bit, and now I'm adding just a little bit of foam on the very, very edge of where the water is hitting the sand. Now I'm just going to take a little bit of white and just add a little bit of highlights on the very top of this foam. The next thing for my wave is just adding in a little bit of shading. And I'm using just some Payne gray, and I'm just kind of adding this in below this foam. Now I'm just doing the same thing up towards this foam, but on this one I'm kind of just bringing it down a little bit into this curve. So I'm just trying to add a little bit of shadows in by using a few of these different bluish gray colors. I'm using more Payne gray just to kind of fill in the shadows of the foam that sits right here on the very edge of the sand. Using a dark olive color, I'm just trying to add a little bit of shading into the bottom of this curve. And I'm just trying to kind of run it all into the same line I drew out. I'm adding my highlights in on the flat part of the water here under the wave. So you can see I did that right here for the reflection of the foam, and then I'm just going to do a little bit over here. I'm still using that light color, and I'm just bringing a little bit of foam up into the wave here. And then across the flat part of the water. And you can see that as I do it up into the wave, it's curving and kind of almost going vertical, whereas it starts to get a bit flatter on the flat part of the water. Now I'm just touching up some of these foam pieces that I had accidentally gone over with some of that green. And then I'm also going to take a little bit of this white and bring it back onto the other foam I had drawn in here. But I'm going to go ahead and fill this in first. The wave is mostly done, so it's time to start working on the sand. I have kind of the color for the sand I used with a little bit more brown and blue, just to kind of darken it up a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and kind of just add this in here where the sand would be wet. I added a little bit of blue just to kind of be like a secondary front wave here. So I think I might just add a little bit of foam on the front of this, and then the water is done. For the texture of the sand, I have three colors. I have my original sand color, this slightly violet version, and then I also have a blue version. And I'm just going to go ahead and kind of streak those back and forth until I'm happy with how the beach looks. So, using some more violet, I might bring in another splotch of that down here. Everything is done and dry, so it's time to start drawing. I have my chalk pastel pencil, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put Squirtle in here because he's most iconic and he's one of my favorite Pokemon. So I'm going to go ahead and draw him in, and then we'll start painting him. I finished drawing Squirtle, so it's time to start blocking him in. My main color here is primary cyan with white. And then there's just a touch of yellow in, so it's not super blue, it's just a little bit green. So I'm going to go ahead and color block all of Squirtle in. So I've primed the stomach of the Squirtle white, and now I'm taking this light yellowish orange color, and then this is going to be the main colors here for the shell. So I'll fill this in and then just take a little bit of red to bring in some of the shading on it. The next thing I'm going to do is work on shading all of the blue parts. So I'm just going to give them another coat of this light blue color. And then for the shading, I'm just going to mix a tiny bit of red into it to make it slightly purple, and then put that towards the back where the shadow is. I finished most of the color blocking in for Squirtle, but now I need to go ahead and start adding details. So I'm going to go ahead and put them in chalk pastel pencil first. Next I'm using some shading gray to put a little bit of a shadow underneath Squirtle. The first thing I'm going to do for drawing the faces, I'm using my chalk pastel pencil, and then I just drew a line straight down the middle using this middle of the shell line to help me line it up. Then I'm going to go ahead and start drawing in the details with the chalk pastel before I move on to doing it in paint. Once I have things drawn, I can go ahead and start to mark them in. So I just have a tiny bit of black here on my brush, and I'm going to go ahead and just paint right over where the black is going. To paint Squirtle's eyes, I just went ahead and painted these Squirtle's eye color, and it's actually the shell color plus more red, that's all it was. And then I'm just going to go ahead and fill these shapes in, not the entire eye, but kind of like the bottom half here. And then I'm going to use more black and white to kind of give the shapes of the eye, the circles, and the iris and the pupil after the pink is dried. Squirtle is 100% done, and you can see I've already actually drawn the Pokeball, and there's a hand here. I know there's no hand in Pokemon Go. That's okay. I had sketched it in because I felt like it was incomplete, and I didn't want to add any more of the other HUD information because I thought it would detract from the painting. However, for realism's sake, because everything else is pretty realistic, I thought the hand might add something. Someone had actually said it was like you were going on an adventure, more so than just playing Pokemon Go. So I like the idea of the hand being in there, and actually have a baseball for reference because this is the roundest thing I could find that wasn't a Pokeball. We don't have any of those sitting around. So I thought I could use this to kind of figure out my proportions and the exact placement of the fingers. So I'm going to go ahead and just finish touching this up with chalk pastel, and then we'll start painting. It's time to start painting, so I've mixed up a white with a burnt sienna, and then I used just a little bit of blue so it's not too orange. Plus, the painting is very, very cool, so it kind of made it a bit more of a cool skin tone, as opposed to something too warm compared to everything else. Also, I did use the left hand, just because I think that thumb and all of like this part of the hand over here kind of balances out the visual weight of Squirtle, so that's why it's left-handed as opposed to right-handed. It just looks better. So I'm going to go ahead and paint this solid, and then I'm just going to use a little bit of the burnt sienna in blue with no white to bring in some shading. As you can see, the hand is coming along, the Pokeball is kind of coming along. I had primed it white, let it dry, and then I tried to do the bottom half here, this kind of gray color, and it just wasn't working out. So I decided I was going to paint it this solid light gray I have here, but instead of just a plain gray, I used a little bit of ultramarine blue to make it slightly cooler. Like I've mentioned before, everything in this painting is very, very cool, so I'm trying to keep all of my colors kind of cooler versions of themselves. So like there's lots of blues, there's greens, but everything has just a slight bit of blue in it. So I'm going to go ahead and paint this all gray, and then I'm going to bring some of the highlights on top with pure white. For the highlight, I'm just taking some white and then putting it where the highlight's going to go on the bottom of the Pokeball, and then I'm just trying to blend it into the rest of the gray I have here until it's a nice smooth transition between the two. And then I may do that a few more times with more and more white until it gets as light as I want it to be. For the top part of the ball, I have this magenta color, and I've toned it down a little bit with orange and then just a touch of blue-black. So I'm going to go ahead and fill this in solid, and then I'll bring some highlights and shades onto this too. For the highlights for the top of the Pokeball, I just have a plain magenta, and then I'm just going to use the original color I had down first to kind of smooth out the transition between both. I did the highlights, but I don't think it's standing out enough, so I have a little bit of a purple color here, and I'm just going to go ahead and add some shadows into the top part of the Pokeball. The Pokeball is almost done, I just have the center button yet to do. So while that's drying, I'm going to go ahead and finish touching up the thumb. Because I had to paint the Pokeball, I've kind of lost part of it. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill that all back in. For my fingernails, I'm using some of my skin tone plus more white, and then pure white for just the tops of the fingernails. And we're done! We have our Pokémon Go scene at the beach. If you're interested in this piece, you could buy a print or a poster or bid on this original canvas. There's links down below. Also, consider supporting me on Patreon. You can find out more at supportmel.com. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of MalMakes, and I'll see you again here for another video game painting.